Hello, looks like we're live. I'm here. This is Laura Hill with David Mantica. We're here live streaming today on Becoming a Thought Leader, the art of engaging and influential content. And so happy that we're able to get together on this topic today, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How's it going today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah, hanging out here in Pittsburgh. It's a very nice city. It's
yeah.
warm, so that's cool too, believe it or not, from Pittsburgh.
Oh, good. I'm glad you didn't get any of that winter storm.
No, they were just below it.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting for some folks to join, um, just wanted to set the stage a little bit. I know that thought leadership may be a new topic or a new term for some people. And those of us in the marketing world, we're used to saying thought leadership content, and everyone kind of knows what that means. But thought leadership, just to put some definitions out there, is about the type of content that you create when you are putting your expertise out there, in the form of blogs or webinars or live streams or whatever format may be. But it's a way to express yourself and put yourself out there in terms of what you do in whatever area of expertise you are in. And it helps people to get to know you, because a lot of times thought leadership also has an infusion of who you are as a person, maybe a personal story. We'll get into some qualities of what makes good thought leadership content in a little bit, but just wanted to set the stage also to let people know we'll be taking questions at the end. So whether you're watching this live or the recording, we'll try to get to the questions at the end, or you can comment and we can come around later and answer on the comments. And also, just to let some people know who might be interested in this topic, it's really great for coaches, consultants, training industry executives, anybody who is in a role that requires people to get to know you as a person in order to start a business relationship. So a lot of times that applies to coaches and consultants, but also founders of small business, entrepreneurs. It's a way to put content out there that allows you to build your community, build your network out, let people get to know who you are as a person, what you stand for, what's important to you, and also, who you are outside of work too. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But so just wanted to set the stage and I'll ask David first, like, what do you think about personal branding and thought leadership? These are kind of new-ish terms out there. People started talking about personal branding, I think, a few years ago, and now people are kind of perking up their ears as the business world is becoming more volatile, and people are starting to understand the importance of why they need to be paying attention to this.
Yeah, so we got to see the fact that we're a product. We are a product. And that product goes through a life cycle. And there are hills and valleys in that life cycle. The problem is, with a ton of disruption, those hills and valleys, the hills get longer, and it takes longer and longer to get out of the valley. I mean, the hills you go down to the valley really deep, and then it's hard to come back up. So it's anybody in any type of work who wants to show themselves out and above and represent their product, their work product themselves, can build a personal brand. Now, the idea of thought leadership and personal branding is you want to take an area that you're really good at and be able to bring that out in more detail to build out your expertise. That's where the thought leadership part comes in. Ultimately, what we're talking about is a thing called career insurance, building a personal brand and driving the concept of thought leadership within your area of expertise gives you the opportunity to make those valleys less deep and come up off out of the valley to the top of the hill faster because you're out there. People are looking at you. People can connect with you. And when you are interviewing interviewers and hiring managers will look at you on LinkedIn. It's just that is par for the course in any knowledge working area. So personal branding is a form and an element of career insurance. And it's one that I think people have a tendency to shy away from for certain reasons, which we could talk about.
Yeah,
But when done right, it's such a powerful way to be able to express yourself.
absolutely. And, more and more, I'm thinking of it as more important than a resume because,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, especially if you're doing it in a video format, because you can get so much more of an idea of who a person is from a video format than you can from a resume document.
Oh, and the
If,
depth of a LinkedIn page, it's
yep.
just amazing how much depth you can bring into that page to connect in, like you said, live,
Hmm.
physical attributes, 360 attributes of yourself, that video format. And, you can post articles, and those articles can be areas where you want to, talk about from your passion, from your point of belief. Another thing I love about thought leadership too is that it's exciting to be able to think creatively and think critically about certain areas and start to drive a conversation. And that's a really powerful thing, no matter how big or small the community is.
Yeah, this is really an exciting part of personal branding for me because it intersects, overlaps with personal development right here in this area where you get to really hone in on what excites you about what you do. And if you
Yes.
can't find anything that you feel really excited about posting it or blogging or video live streaming about, then, maybe you need to think about what it is that you're doing because there should be some aspect of your work that you want to share and that
Yes.
you're really passionate about. And so that's a good segue for us to talk about what are the qualities of thought leadership. And I posted an article about this recently on LinkedIn where I
Yes,
talked
you
about
did.
the 7 qualities
Hmm.
of good thought leadership content. And the one that I listed first is charisma,
Ah,
because I felt like this is the make or break quality. If you don't have any kind of way of engaging people right out of the gate, then you've lost. I mean, we know in the marketing world that we have a few seconds to grab someone's
yep.
attention. And so if you have a very monotone speaking voice and your
Hmm.
presentation skills have never been assessed, or like whatever it is, maybe your format's writing, well, you got to figure out how to write a good hook to get them in the gate, when they first start reading. Like, this is
Yep.
charisma. This is putting your sense of humor, using your facial expressions, your hands when you talk.
Yes.
People need that good first impression. They need to feel interested in what you're saying. And so, David, you've been really always, we've worked together for years. You've always been preaching this to every
Absolutely.
business owner. This is really important.
Trust and competency. Charisma is one of the best ways to connect with people in the first 3 to 5 seconds, like you're talking about, and show and make them feel like you have their trust and they are competent. Plus, there's an element of inspiration in charisma. People want to be inspired, and you get inspired by showing a very passionate view and thought around the area you're talking about. And you don't have to be an extrovert to be charismatic. Charismatic is, like you said, Laura, perfectly using your voice, using your
Mhm.
body. Body is a more powerful communication method than anything that comes out of your mouth. And
Yeah,
realizing that you need to provide value to the people you're talking with. I mean, if you don't see that, then you really shouldn't be spreading a message.
that's right. And if it shows that you don't value their time, if you're
Yep.
not very intentional about your message and you're not very intentional about the delivery, it's like having empathy for the reader or
Hmm.
for the viewer. Like,
That's
you
right.
want them to have a good experience because you want to deliver a message that they're going to get something out of. So if you're not coming from that place, then it's really hard to be charismatic.
No, exactly. It's like Thought leadership isn't trying to shove your belief down somebody's throat. I mean, that's the antithesis of it. Thought leadership is about wanting to start conversations to allow people to process the things you're talking about so they can critically think about it and then they can add to it. I love my daughter did the fan fiction stuff. And it's amazing what some of these kids can do and building out off the stories that they read or the shows that they watch. And that's a really strong form of critical thinking. But thought leadership can be done in that way. You want people to build off and grow the things you're talking about.
Right. And so I know we're going till 12:30, so I'm going to go at a rapid pace here with the last 6 qualities here. Let's keep moving. Number 2, which I feel like is equally important to charisma, is making sure it's values driven. So making sure that whatever you're putting out there has an ethical foundation, that has something that you believe in behind it. And so that you can become a source of common sense and practical advice for people.
Yeah.
This is something that is easier said than done, for sure. A lot of times people shy away from this aspect of thought leadership content, but I'd encourage people to really examine what it is that is important to you. You know, what are your core values and how can you infuse whatever you're putting out there with those values?
You know, it's funny, Laura. I sometimes tend to shy away from that, right? But then as I started thinking about myself more, what my values were, one of them is being pragmatic. And I can see where when I speak, in my perspective, hopefully it's true, I try to be very pragmatic, try to keep things simple.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to add the fun, enjoyable element because that's part of my values is that you should have fun. You should express yourself with some level of enjoyment. But, you know, for a long time, I was questioning myself around that going, am I controversial? And the reality is I'm not, but I am very pragmatic. And maybe in
Mm-hmm.
that pragmatism that there might be there is. I see a lot of people going back and forth with. There is an element of getting them to think and build off of it.
Mm-hmm. And one simple way that you can do this is you might pick a charity or a cause that you care about and just every once in a while post about that. Maybe you spend time volunteering somewhere. You can, maybe it's an animal shelter or whatever it is. You can post about that, and especially on LinkedIn, those kinds of posts peppered in are really helpful for people to see who you are outside of work and what you care about. Another thing is to just speak out against things in your industry that you see are either wrong or could be done in a better way, or just helping people see the industry kind of shortcomings. It's talking about those challenges that exist as something we're all facing together, so that you're not putting yourself above anyone else. You're not, putting yourself on
I
a
want people to be
pedestal.
doing that with solutions. The only thing I would say tied to that is that if you are digging into an area that might be broken, providing solutions to how that could be fixed instead of just, droning on
Yeah.
and on about something being broken will make your personal brand stronger and show that you're an executor, not just a person who's throwing sticks at something or
That's a great
rocks.
point. That's a great point. So let's move on. Number 3 is conviction. So this is all about a strong point of view. And it doesn't have to be arrogant or egotistical. It's just, taking a stance on things. Do you have any thoughts about conviction or how that plays in?
I think it's being consistent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I talk, my conviction is around being pragmatic, critically thinking, looking from a systems perspective, and then leadership as a verb instead of a noun. So whenever I'm speaking, I'm trying to hold that conviction to those beliefs. So I'm not wishy-washy. It's hard sometimes because you want to
Yeah.
connect with an audience, and sometimes your audience isn't matching up that way. But ultimately, when you do that, your message is somewhat repetitive, but then people start grabbing hold of elements of your message. It's like I always talk about, it's better to get things done than doing something. I talk about that a lot. That's a conviction element for me. And I
Mm-hmm.
talk a lot about the idea that status quo is the invisible killer. Again, that's a conviction. And those type of things you can pepper throughout how you do and what you do.
Yep. And that's a great tie into number 4, which is consistency. And so when I wrote this, it was about showing up regularly and kind of that cadence that you have for whether it's posting on LinkedIn, whether it's showing up for a live stream. And it doesn't need to necessarily be every day. It's just making it regular enough to where people come to depend on you to show up and be a source of guidance on a certain topic at
Yeah.
regular intervals. And so we can talk about consistency in terms of a cadence, but we can also talk about consistency, like you were saying, David, in terms of a message, because that's
Yes.
what branding is. Branding is a shorthand for learning what someone does and what they're about. It's like the word branding comes from branding livestock, putting a symbol, burning a symbol into livestock as a way of ownership. That's where that word came from. And now we use it for burning a concept into someone's mind. Like,
Yep.
this is David. This is what he stands for. And we have to do it in a shorthand because people don't have the brain bandwidth to, memorize pages and pages of information about all the things that you do and all the things that you're about. But we have to be able to concisely say, okay, well, here it is, and be consistent so people can remember it.
It's interesting. And as you were talking, I'm thinking more about it. It's like people sometimes get scared of both conviction and values driven, right? Because they feel like it might alienate. We talked about that a little bit. There was a book by Ayn Rand, called Fountainhead, and Howard Roark, the architect. His message was, people who are like me will come and find me. So if your personal brand is around some conviction, people will find you, and they will connect with you more strongly than being boring. I used to have really long hair because I felt there were some girls that really liked that. So there was a stronger connection there.
We need a picture. You have
Oh
to
my
dig
gosh,
up
you
a
should see it. It
picture.
was hilarious. Aaron asked about branding for tattoos. I would say yes, there is a concept of branding with tattoos with regard to who you are, how you express yourself. And, I know our older generation feels a little bit more uncomfortable about it, but I can see executives in 15, 20 years having tattoos. That's a form of expression. And I know I've been considering one that ties back to my faith. I just have been too chicken to do it yet.
Well, that's interesting. I do see people using visual cues as part of their personal brand, whether it's a funny looking hat or a
Yep.
certain type of shirt or whatever it might be. So, tattoos certainly can play into that because it helps people remember you. If there's just one thing that's kind of a pattern interrupter about you,
Yep.
you're always wearing the same funny hat. You're always, maybe you grow out a beard if you're a man or whatever the thing is. It helps people remember you. You stand
Absolutely.
out from the crowd. So something to consider. But moving on to number 5, which is adaptability. And this is all about speed and response time when it comes to current events, what's
This is hard
happening.
for most thought leaders.
This is very hard because a
Yes.
lot of thought leaders, they like to plan content in advance,
Yep.
double check everything,
Yep.
make it very perfect.
Yep.
And, when there's a current event that happened that affected us all, and there needs to be some kind of statement about it, that is just like totally derails the whole day.
And they can't pivot from that. And also thought leaders get stuck in the box. And then when that box gets broken because of disruption, they have a much more difficult time breaking through that box. So, this adaptability is such an important thing for personal branding too. I mean, you want to articulate that you can pivot and adjust. You want to be able to, in your presentations, be able to handle pivots
Yeah.
and adjustments when people throw certain questions out there. And, I want that. I want people who can do that. I mean, I connected with
Mhm.
you when we met because you pivoted and adjusted. You thought through it. You were thoughtful and you thought critically, but you also pivoted and adjusted. And that's a strong personal brand quality that can, if you could showcase that, especially in maybe
Mhm.
your recommendations on LinkedIn, but from a thought
Yep.
leader, oh my God, it's critical. Absolutely critical.
Right. Yeah, in today's business world, you always talk about VUCA. You introduced me to the volatility, uncertainty, what is it?
Complexity and ambiguity.
Complexity and ambiguity of
A VUCA
today's
world.
business world. So this is all about being resilient to
Yes.
the stress of those changing circumstances.
Getting
And
comfortable being uncomfortable.
yeah, so if you are able to respond to current events, whether it could be something as simple as even the weather, whatever is affecting everyone in your audience. So whether you have a local audience or a global audience, maybe you're picking different current events that affect your industry and then making a comment on, an insight or helping them make meaning of how this is changing their day-to-day life, then you'll be a very trusted and valued source of information. And they can come to trust that you're going to provide a solid perspective on whatever it is that comes next time.
Amen.
All right, so we're almost done. We've got a few more minutes. We're going to talk about number 6 and number 7, and then we're going to close out, answer any questions. Number 6, which you already touched on, David, just being authentically fun.
Oh yeah.
So, you've always been, that's part of your personal brand.
That's
You
my
want to talk about
brand.
that?
Yes. I mean, I have a saying, and it's probably a little too earthy for this, but everybody goes poo poo, you know? We can't get so high on our horse about who we are and our ideas. We want to connect and learn. And part of that having fun is, just engaging people at where they're at, being able to make fun of yourself in certain circumstances, be able to
Mhm.
point out where your weaknesses are. I can certainly tell you my weaknesses very quickly. And, that is it just makes people comfortable. Being authentically fun ultimately gets people comfortable, and then they'll listen to your message more.
Absolutely. And it's interesting what you say. I can tell you what my weaknesses are. That's something that in my article I talk about the story of the deer in the forest,
Yep.
where the deer only has 2 color receptors, and so it cannot see reds or oranges. And there's other animals in the forest, there's tigers and there's monkeys and other animals, but when the tiger approaches and it's lurking in the grasslands, the deer can't see it. So it's blending in with the greens and browns, and the deer can't see red or orange. So the monkeys are in the trees, and when they see the deer, they have a warning call, and they sound this alarm, and the deer run away because they rely on the monkey to say, hey, I see the tiger. And so this is how I started off my article, because we all need people around us who can help us get to know our blind spots,
Yep.
help us get to know, like you were saying, what your weaknesses are. Well, that was a process that you probably, a combination of self-awareness and feedback from other people
Feedback, big
that
time
you
feedback.
trusted. So we all need that, because as thought leaders, we have to be receptive to feedback so we can see those blind spots and those areas where we need to work on a little bit.
I like to talk about that as it relates to acolytes, followers. Thought leaders have a tendency to, ultimately build this group of followers who think a lot like them, which
Mm.
affects the adaptability, and it also affects their ability to be, you know, to connect with people across the board, and they lose the power to really understand complex issues from different perspectives. So being authentically fun, being able to bring in people from diverse areas, diverse thoughts can really help with regard to keeping you up and keeping you adaptive, like we talked about before.
Absolutely. And you have to seek that out, because our default is, like you said, to connect with people who are like us.
Yep.
And so if you're
Absolutely.
not actively seeking that out and cultivating relationships with a diverse group of people, you're going to be in that same like collective blind spot.
You're right.
So,
That's it. That's what happens.
that's what
C.S.
happens.
Lewis was notorious for that. He surrounded himself by people who really believed in what he believed in and weren't challenging. He's a wonderful. I love C.S. Lewis, but that scenario is not good for broader creative thinking and adaptability.
Right. Well, and that brings us to our last one, which I feel like is the obvious one. Obvious in that if you're a thought leader, you have to have a depth of knowledge in your subject matter. That's a given. I put it last because I felt like it needs to be last, because that's what people lead with. They lead with their knowledge, they lead with their expertise, and they think that that's the most important thing. Whereas if you don't have all the others, then it's, people might not even listen or connect with you to
Yep.
really be able to consume and digest your depth of knowledge.
One arrogant jerk. That's the issue, right? And I think people get too scared that they don't have enough knowledge. This is another thing as it relates to slowly starting to build your personal brand. You don't have to be a PhD on the rhino's butt. You want to be able to have a broad overall perspective and understanding of the area you're talking about. And you got to do it with these 6 elements that Laura has presented. And you want to be able to share other information that they can absorb outside of you. And that sharing adds to authenticity. The deeper you get in your knowledge, the more myopic you get. And for thought leadership in VUCA, you have to be careful of that. One, because it disrupts you and you won't be able to get up that mountain when you're stuck in the valley of disruption. But 2, you're not giving your folks as much value than you could if you are keeping yourself wide, keeping yourself looking at other things, and being open to stuff that comes to you from others.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good ending point, I think. Before we go, I do want to mention that there's a lot of great webinars coming up where David and other speakers that we have come and go in even more depth. These live streams are 30 minutes, but if you go to the SoftEd website, you will see that we have, and I'll pop the link up here, softed.com/US/learning hub. There you will find not just webinars, but white papers and other blogs and resources. But if you go to the webinars page, you'll see we have several webinars coming up, and we're always adding on. David, I know, is going to be presenting about presentation skills, which ties in nicely to this topic. And so if you want to learn how to become a better presenter, if you want to learn how to become a better leader, there's a lot of topics around being agile. Other things you want to mention about what's coming up, David?
No, not really. But what hit me was Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers and his conviction with the pen and his depth of knowledge. I mean, remember, it's not just video or web seminars. That pen is a very powerful tool. And Alexander Hamilton, changed how we did banking, how we built a bureaucracy, and a good bureaucracy from a federal government standpoint. And so he was always, this conviction was so strong, never wavered.
Great. So, call to action for our audience. Let us know in the comments if you got anything out of this. If there's something you're going to do differently in your thought leadership or your personal branding, would love to see you, put a post out, put an article out, do something different, and let us know if you have questions. And we really appreciate your attention and your interest in our topics. And please let us know if you have feedback or questions. David, anything before we sign off?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.